Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Executive Health and Life. I'm your host, Julian Hayes II, back at it again with one of my favorite words, another fascinating guest. Every guest is fascinating. I say it every episode, and I truly mean it. And so today we are talking about, I think this is actually a very timely topic and episode to talk about, kind of with the way things are going in the world right now, the economy, some potential things going on. And it's all about the emotional stresses of running a business. And there's a lot of things that intertwines. You know, as we talk about health, we mention nutrition, we mention exercise and sleep and all those good things. But, you know, a lot of us are business owners, leaders, rising up the ranks in all different positions. And so there's another component there, which is our emotions and our stresses, which can affect our physical outlook. So with that said, there's a small business survey that showed that 81% of owners say that running the small business is taken away from their personal lives, which is unfortunate. And many of them missed out on the romantic and family life, which is an even bigger issue there. And so 39% of those singles were unable to remember the last time that they went on a date. Wow, a date. And 53% not enjoying a family holiday because of the pressures. So I'm talking with an expert today who's hopefully going to solve some of those problems for us. Actually, I know he is. And he's done a lot of things. He has an extensive resume. Currently, he's the Chief Growth Officer at Xero. He's a board member at The Gap, and he's involved in a few other companies. Apparently, he also has a patent as well. He's holding a patent. So he's a man of all trades. He has many other exec positions as well, which we'll probably talk about. I am speaking with none other than Chris O'Neill. Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Julian. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for that very kind introduction.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. And you know, I think a good place to start is I was just going through your Twitter, and not to sound crazy, but there's a quote from Seinfeld that you shared, and it was to find the torture that you can live with. That's a great metaphor for not only the running and the training I do, but it's also a great metaphor for life and business as well. So, is that one of your favorite quotes that you live by?
Well, it's a recent one for sure, and it's just an acknowledgement that like there are things in life, whether it's in your personal life dealing with raising a family, or certainly the challenges, the ever present challenges, or being executive in a business, and you just have to acknowledge that there's going to be some things you have to embrace and just live with it. And you know, it's about setting expectations, setting ambitious goals rather. But also understand that there's going to be, peaks and valleys. You just have to know that and know it's part of the game. Embrace it and find comfort with it. Right? Like no one ever said life's going to be easy, and certainly lives of small businesses, certainly even without pandemics, really difficult. So I do like that quote. I collect quotes, and I have like a place where I keep them, and I sometimes throw them onto Twitter and social media. Or really just read them to gain inspiration, or just really think about what it might mean for others.
Well, I've added this to my quote bank as well now, so I thank you for that. And before we even dive any further, let's get a brief origin story about you. So if we go back in time, Chris as a little boy, would we have guessed that he's doing what he's doing right now?
I could. It's probably no, a hard no. So I grew up in Canada, in a very small town, on the I like to say the banks of the mighty Maitland River, in a town called Goderich, Ontario. And Goderich is about 7,000, 8,000 people, so it's really small. And my parents were small business owners, and so I know of what I speak, what I saw firsthand. My parents just doing their thing. Right? My mom did all the kind of office related stuff, balance the books, and my dad would do the staff and order the goods for the small retail store that we operated there. We all had to work in that store. I was like a pretty stereotypical Canadian boy, played hockey. That's all I really cared about. I played a lot of sports. Didn't really take school very seriously until my parents actually sent me away. They sent me away. It felt like I was punished or something. I went to boarding school in Toronto, Ontario, where I was originally born. And that's when I woke up to a much broader world. Toronto's an amazing city, very cosmopolitan, lots of different cultures, lots of different backgrounds. And it was there, I'm like, oh my goodness, there's a whole wide world out here. And that was the first real phase of my career. And And then I've been very fortunate from there to really had an interesting career that's taken me all over the world. I'm currently in Silicon Valley, so I've had a really fun time in technology. But if you had asked me when I was a little boy, I wanted to play hockey. Like really, maybe as I got a little older, drink some beer and play hockey. And I certainly wouldn't have thought I'd be have had so much opportunity and so many great teams to be part of, wonderful companies. So the short answer is no, but boy, I've enjoyed the ride.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have a great resume. People, you have Tim Hortons, you have Google, you have Evernote, you have Xero right now, you have the Gap, and then there's a couple other ventures that you're doing. So the process of becoming a senior exec, let's dive a little bit into kind of your career trajectory and rising up the ranks like that, because I'm sure a lot of people are interested. Yeah. Exactly, what does it take to become a senior exec?
Yeah, it always makes more sense when you look backwards. I can just tell you that it certainly is serendipitous, and you really you kind of live in the moment and really prioritize things that matter to you. And to me, that's all about people. So like my criteria is pretty simple. It starts with solving interesting or hard problems with great people. And that might sound trite, but for me, the force multiplier on working with great people is higher, I think, than average. So that maybe is a tracing back to my roots as a person who learned most things in life through playing team sport. I'm a big believer in the value of sport. I'm fortunate to be raising with my wife two lovely, awesome kids. They're teenagers, and sports is an essential part of their life. And that's by design, and I'm just thrilled that they enjoy it. So to me, it's really about those problems in the world that you can solve alongside amazing people. And really, especially at this stage, and I didn't realize it in the early stage of my career because it really was about just learning, but it's really about doing something that matters, right, in the world, and having impact against a mission that really, really matters. And that really informs where I am today. And when I think about when I've been at my best as a leader, it really is when that mission speaks to me, on a very deep level. But ultimately comes back to like really surrounding yourself with people you can learn from, people that you trust, and that you can go into battle together. So, really those have been some of the common ingredients for me. And leadership more generally is about delivering results against, together as a team, and really building up capabilities in teams. So I've been really, really fortunate, but I think it really traces back to a life of learning most things in a hockey arena or on a soccer field, or, places in between. So that's sort of at the highest level how I've thought about the career and the journey. And I've always tried to prioritize people.
How do you think someone, in terms of becoming a better leader, what do you see as some of the common kind of chokeholds and gaps that usually stops someone from being a good leader to a great leader?
Yeah, the first is clearly self-awareness. It's really to understand yourself. And if you don't understand yourself, it's really difficult to then, really know how to build teams and work and nurture, really work on continuous improvement, right? Like that's an essential part. You have to know what you're great at. I thought that's one part of it. And the other part is to be open and vulnerable, right? It's like, if you don't know, first of all, your strengths and the things where you have to develop, and then you're not willing to put yourself out there, then you're really limited, I think. And I think those are the two dimensions that I see as common things that hold people back who maybe have done really well in the earlier phases of their career. But then the later stages, it's really about self-awareness. It's really about emotional intelligence as much, if not more than IQ, raw intelligence. And then the last piece that I'd say, I've had high highs and low lows as you do in your career. And I think the last part is about resilience, and almost like I came across this term recently called the adversity quotient, right? I think that we all have to really build our adversity quotient, because if you're going to do something that matters in life, you're going to have setbacks, and you got to learn from it. And that really builds what I've stolen this term called the adversity quotient, but it really does take a combination of those three things, I think, to be an effective leader. And that's certainly what I look for when I'm hiring people.
I like that adversity quotient. I like that. So you're giving me a couple extra things to add to the bank as well. Kind of piggybacking on that and leading to the
Yeah.
next thing is we kind of mentioned the psychological price of
Yeah.
entrepreneurship and just being in general being responsible for
Yeah.
a lot of individuals, and it's not just those individuals, it's there's families as well. So we can kind of understand, going back to that survey that we talked about at the beginning of the episode, that this price on that. So over the course of years, since you kind of been in both worlds, and so what has kind of been some ways that you kind of have gotten better at navigating it? Because I'm sure day one you were not that good at it.
Well, I still wrestle with it, to be really clear. I'm constantly experimenting with different ways, both in terms of my physical and spiritual and emotional well-being. Like, think about, I have a friend, Alan Mishra, who has written a book about what he calls vitality, which is the 4 elements of what makes you vital, right? Physical, emotional, spiritual, and then your mental health. So I'm constantly, fascinated with that. But let's acknowledge it really is. It's 24/7, right? When you're running a business, whether you're literally doing something, a task related, or you're thinking about, you can never. I mean, it's the successful leaders that I know, or the people running a business. It's really difficult for them to switch off. But you have to find ways to invest in outside interests and passions that make you a more well-rounded person, and really refueling that yourself and your battery, right? It's I once took a course, and we had this amazing Irish teacher who, he works with Navy SEALs and surgeons and executives, and he gave us this metaphor. He said, and pilots, he works with pilots too, and the metaphor was it's actually illegal to land a plane with not much fuel left in the tank, right? You will get arrested if you are a pilot and you land a plane without much left in the tank. And you can probably imagine where the metaphor goes. It's think about the times that we do that at the end of a day or a week. I got home, got stuck in a storm last night. I got home at 1 a.m. I was landing that plane with not much fuel in my tank. So trying to be aware of that, but you can't let that battery get too low. You have to find things that will recharge it. So, early in my, actually it was just very early in my Google career, we had this course and we took a diagnostic, and it was kind of like an energy audit of where you were. And I was bright red, not in a good way. I just had a kid. I just started a job. We just bought a house. And I was had all the major stressors checked off. And the takeaway from me was, look, you have to get ahead of that stuff early in your life or throughout life to build in routines that basically can allow you to rejuvenate your vitality. And the metaphor was really helpful for me about, it's not your time that you're trying to manage, it's actually your energy. So I've really used that and found ways, not always successfully, I might add. I've burnt out more times than I care to admit. So I don't pretend to have perfected this, but I'm at least aware of the different elements of what causes me to be energized and show up, and the things that can really, really, I call it my recipe, right? It's literally, if I'm a person, what's my recipe to show up as a leader as best I can? So I encourage people to find out what their recipe is, because mileage may vary, in terms of things that work for me versus for you, Julian, or people who are listening to this podcast. But I really, really encourage people to think about their energy. You can give a couple of tactical tips if that's helpful, about how I found it to be helpful for me and people I get to interact with.
What's a couple of the strongest ingredients in your recipe in terms of helping to manage your energy?
Yeah, I orient everything around sleep, and again, I struggle with it, to be clear. But if that's the kind of top, or maybe the base layer of the metaphorical Maslow's hierarchy of needs is sleep. If I 4 or 5 of the following things, somewhere around 7 hours of sleep. If I get some cardio exercise, it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be a walk, 20 minutes. If I eat clean food and I don't have any alcohol, and if added bonus on rare days, if I just have 5, 10, even 15 minutes of just mindfulness, just quiet time where I can just reflect. I can't remember last time I ran the table with all 5 of those things, but if I get 2 or 3 of those things in a day, I know that it's really starting off in a good way. But it really starts with sleep. I've become obsessed with this. I've read a lot. Matt Walker has a book, Why We Sleep. I
a good
highly
book.
recommend that. And it just really reflects about, like, it's almost like a super drug that really fuels your effectiveness. And when I get off track, it usually has to do with sleep. So that's where I would recommend.
Yeah, I can notice when I go a couple of days without not getting a sufficient amount of sleep, and usually it's just my mood, and I'm just a little more snappy.
Yeah.
So, So as we move on for that, and let's talk about your current venture right now at Xero, and this is it's a newly created role, and I see a lot of parallels, kind of, in terms of there's a lot of different things, because for listeners out there, Xero's not located in, it's not headquartered in the U.S. It's quite far away in New Zealand, and so you're working with teams all over, and it's a new position. So the first thing is, what attracted you to it?
Yeah, it really goes back to what I was referring to. I saw my parents growing up. We all, as I said, we all had to work. I have 3 siblings, 2 older brothers and a younger sister. And we all had to work in the store. And like my parents, I used to say, had 2 jobs. Like, they would do the job on the floor of the retail store and the office of the retail store we operated. And then, like, we would come home from our various activities, usually sports related stuff. And we'd always try to have dinner together. So we'd have dinner together around this creaky old wooden table in our small town and Goderich. And then afterwards, we'd clear the table. We'd always have to do dishes. And then my parents would start their second shift, right? They'd start their second job, which was basically all the back office stuff that they had to take care of. And, just left a searing mark. First of all, I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't mind working hard, but boy, they work extra hard. Like, there was never a night I can remember where I didn't go to bed before my father wasn't sitting on, with my mom usually at the other end of the table doing their second job. So really, to me, as I've been fortunate to have a career in technology, I was like, gosh, there has to be a better way. Like, there has to be a way to take at least some of that second job and get it done. And sure enough, there is. Like, there's lots of different things. So, and that's really what Xero is all about, right? It's like, gosh, how can you make and automate some elements of the system of record, like your financial statements? Like, you need to have financial statements as any business of any scale needs them. So that's really what Xero does. It really takes some of that burden away from the small businesses and their coaches or advisors. So to me, that mission speaks to me. And then really, I love global businesses, right? I've been fortunate to work in all sorts of different places in the world. I do love we were talking a little bit about the Kiwi culture, just how beautiful New Zealand is, and Australia. These are wonderful places. And they basically speaks to my Canadian upbringing and roots and the sensibilities, I guess. So I've been really fortunate to work with some incredible humans on the other side of the world, as well as over in Europe and about that. And then it's ultimately about how you can put that back office, sometimes we say back office, in your back pocket as an owner. So how do you abstract away a lot of the complexities and all those things that get in the way of the real reason why a small business started the business in the first place? Really, that's what gets in the way. Those surveys results you're describing is like, gosh, you're so busy doing a lot of this back office stuff, this routine, this stuff that you'd rather probably not do. Like, most small businesses didn't get into business to do taxes. I can assure you that. So we're trying to help them abstract away a lot of that stuff. So to me, being a small part in this mission to say, hey, how do we make their lives truly easier, and not just hand wavy say that, but to actually be able to literally, when you talk to accountants, you talk to bookkeepers that we work with, they're like, literally, you guys changed my life, and they mean that sincerely. So being a part of that's really, really cool. And there's a lot of other jobs that we're helping small businesses do, from everything from the movement of money to help them get paid faster, helping them manage employees if they have them, helping pay their employees properly and in different ways, and then really extending the value by having lots of other participants in our ecosystem that are allowed to build solutions and technology on top of this platform to solve many other, like thousands of other problems. So it's an honor. It's a great company with a wonderful mission and a real human culture with good human beings, and an orientation to helping make a difference in the lives of small businesses, which is really cool.
So I'm curious, like the thought process of you have to build this division, this part of the company up. So how does that go about? Are you thinking of certain roles, or do you base it off what's the objective, and then you find roles for that?
Yeah. So The original, like the system of record. So basically, there's this thing called the general ledger, and that is really what then translates into financial statements at every company, and that's really where Xero started. And we do that really well. So to stay organized and stay compliant and to pay your taxes, like that's really the main job, if you will, that we're hired to do. And then there are others, right? So as I mentioned, I'm like, gosh, every small business is like has to get paid, right? So, and one of the challenges of a small business, and if you step back for a second and think of the real challenge, it's really hard to think about it. But about 50% of businesses make it past their 5th anniversary. So about half die by the time they turn 5. And what are the reasons that is, and how can we bend that curve, if you will? One of them is cash flow, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you really, even when you're growing, you need cash flow. So getting access to cash, just in the day-to-day stuff, like I issue an invoice, and how do we make it really easy for you to pay me fast? And I give you an incentive. Well, part of it is managing the flow of money, both money out and money into the company. So that's one part. And the other is the management of people. Again, the biggest job for that is really paying them properly. But there are many, many other things, making sure benefits are there if you have them, those sorts of things. So we're really intentional about, okay, so we say, how do we move from a system of record, right, to a system of engagement with people? And then over time, and this is where AI and some of these things that become buzzy in the Valley and all over the world right now, is how can you be a system of advice or insight, if you will, to say, hey, maybe your inventory levels are piling up a little too high, or gosh, you could maybe take advantage of this opportunity over here with a supplier of yours. So how do you use collective intelligence to make specific recommendations for a small business to make their business run a little bit better? So to me, it's about, from the original beginnings of this system, other jobs, and we're really intentional about money, people, and then goods like inventory. So if you're selling stuff, how do you make all that stuff just integrate and automate so that you can, again, get back to running your business and the passion that you have for doing that.
So speaking of people, and that was one of the things you mentioned, is that you're working with individuals from various countries. And so, and you mentioned that you also love global businesses. So you have experience doing this, obviously, but how is the adjustment in terms of, like, there's so many different cultures and even just the way you communicate. So I'm from Nashville, but I lived in New York for a year during grad school. And when I came back to Nashville, I still had my New York mentality on. So I was a lot more direct. Yeah. I was a little more just like, come on, let's go. I lost a little of my Southern hospitality, quote unquote. I got it back now. But, how is that? You're conveying kind of a mission, a vision for your role and in the company overall, but then you have so many different cultures and everything. So how do you kind of get everyone on board?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I believe that there are some core truths about how people like to be treated, and what especially in the work context, what they expect. Right? They expect to be working on something meaningful. Daniel Pink's work is really, I think, is part of it's like autonomy, purpose, and mastery, autonomy, and purpose. Right? Mm-hmm. Those three things come together. I believe those are universal, right? Wherever anyone is in the world. So the interpretation of that might be slightly different. So, again, come back to being self-aware, really assuming positive intent, right? So if you demonstrate to someone that you care about them, right? This goes back to some of Kim Scott's work in Radical Candor. She talks about you have to show that you care personally, and then you have to be direct. And again, that is true across all cultures. So how do you find a way to demonstrate that you care directly? Well, like we all know that. Like you can tell if someone cares about you or not. So you find a way to do that. That then is the recipe for building trust over time. So that if I do something or I say something that is culturally interpreted in a different way, you're going to assume positive intent, and you're going to say, "Hey, Chris, you said this. Like, what did you mean? Like, is that how am I to interpret that?" So to me, it's about a base layer of understanding of what people expect when they show up in their personal and professional life. How do you deliver that? How do you build a foundation of trust so that when you're going about to do work, you can establish a common understanding. You can establish team norms, right, in terms of how things get done. I'm a big fan of actually articulating that, right? Like just really like, what are our values? How do we get things done around here? How do we make decisions? Right? How do we communicate to our people? How do we communicate with one another? And so on. And how do you have those rituals that are written down and then really celebrated? Those are the things that I found to be some of the foundations for really effective cross culture, leadership and working. And it does not, it's not always smooth sailing, but with those sorts of things in place, you can come back to a strong front foundation, or a kind of a calm harbor, if you will, sometimes when you're out at sea and get buffeted around by the winds.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'm curious, what does success look like for you at as you're building this position out? What does that look like?
Well, I know it's not directly what you asked. Success for me is raising good kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really what you're after. To me,
I like that answer though. I kind of like that answer though. But I get your point though.
Well, yeah, I have a 17-year-old who's going to be, going away to university in a year or so. So I'm getting introspective. I'm like, oh man, like we only had a little bit of time left here, but I digress. To me, it comes back to what I was describing, right? Like life as a small business is hard, and for many reasons that's part of the journey, and that's part of what makes it special. But there's a whole bunch of the tasks that just need to be simplified. So to me, it's about, hey, can we bend that curve? Can we make that number smaller? The people that don't make it past 5 years, or maybe stayed in the positive, how do we have higher survivability rates by basically helping, removing some of that complexity or some of the administrative chore and burden for small business. So that would be, at the highest level, that would be what it would be like, so that, business can be more joyful, right? It can be that, so that when you're trying to do something, like I admire companies like Stripe and companies like Shopify. Stripe is accepting payment just easy. It used to be really, really difficult. Now it's not. Shopify, same thing, right? Setting up a store, right? A storefront used to be, you have to jump through all these hoops, and now you can just, kind of get going in a matter of a few clicks. And there are many examples. If every layer of the stack, if you will, or much of these jobs, there are really wonderful tools and technology in place that really helps with that real purpose. Like if you want to remove the friction, really just become like an operating system that helps those entrepreneurs just do their thing, right? And the good news is there's more businesses being started in the United States, and to some extent the rest of the world, than ever before. COVID was a bit of an accelerant to that. So people are starting businesses, and really our success is to make them more successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think people will actually be surprised to hear that. And that's kind of what I see with, there's talks of a recession, and could be in a recession now if you go by the original definition, I believe. But yeah. So a lot of times people don't think that usually during these downtimes is when it's a good time to start a business, or when most people do just take that jump. So this question here is like, say we have a small business out there, and we've been talking about this 5-year period as kind of one of the milestones. Say they're in year 3 or 5, so they're still probably a little scrappy getting by and everything. And, you got all this kind of doom and gloom in the news a little bit in terms of about what's coming and how things are going to be. What are maybe 2 to 3 tidbits of advice that you would give someone at that stage right now who knows that maybe the next year or so, it might be a little more challenging?
Yeah, I would say a few things. The original reason why the person started the company usually lies the truth of the kernel, because what is the most important thing in a small business is, are you solving a real problem, and are you doing it in a way that's unique in some way, shape, or form? It doesn't have to be some crazy many sentences of differentiation. It's just like, what's your niche, and how can you defend it, and how can you really keep your eye on that, right? What is it that we do uniquely on this earth that very few others can do? So I'd say that. And then the other is, like, there are tools that can make life a lot easier. So I would suggest people experiment with different tools, right? There's lots of innovation in the SaaS world that, really, especially for small businesses right now, there are more and more things that can really, like, take payments, right? The fact that people issue checks in this country, and there's like a crazy high percentage of people that still do business with manual checks, like, that's just silly to me. It's like an administrative burden that no one needs. Like, just automate and digitize things wherever you can. Now that's just going to make your business much more efficient. It'll improve your cash flow, improve some core elements of the operation. So that's what I'd say. And then the other one is brace for build your resilience and be braced for a long journey. It's going to be there are going to be ups and going to be downs. And coming back to the things we were describing before, find a way to put your metaphorical oxygen mask on so that you can take care of yourself first, so that you can ultimately then be there for your team, be there for your customers and your community. So those would be the three things. Like, number one, anchor back in your unique value proposition to the world and why you're unique. Secondly, is really find ways to remove some of the friction that really can move some of the most important cash flow as being one example. And then lastly, like, really show up as a leader by basically continuing to invest in your own well-being and your own vitality.
Okay, I like that. And so as we get ready to kind of wrap this up here, there's a few last questions. And so I'm personally curious, the process of getting a patent, and what was the inspiration behind that?
Yeah, that's interesting. It's an interesting one. So we were, I was looking for ways at Evernote to think about really the teams had so much energy and so many great ideas. And, we actually did a hack week. Like, sometimes you do a hack day or hack weekend. And what we did is there's no constraint. There's basically other than everyone in the company has to participate, and they have to come up with an idea that you're going to have 4 to 5 days from beginning to end to get it done. And mine was related to how we could use handwritten notes and translate those automatically into digital form. So one is like this optical character recognition. And it was in the specific context that said a lot of salespeople were using Evernote. And sometimes they would handwrite and sometimes they would use notes. But the idea, the nugget was, how do we take all that in, whether it's handwritten or Evernote written, how do we just port that stuff into Salesforce, right? So if we're sitting here in a sales context, it's like, okay, what's the opportunity? How many seats? Who's the decision maker? Some of the key questions that you either prepare before a sales interaction or that you extract or you learn through the course of that conversation. And how do we just automatically do that? So it was really that idea. We worked with an amazing team that week to do it. And they scanned literally years of my notebooks to start to detect patterns. Like, this is what generative AI is really all about today. This goes back many years. So it's just like automatically taking these inputs and then mapping them into, in this case, it was Salesforce. So that was the gist of it. And yeah, someone said, like, wow, this is kind of an interesting idea. We should apply for a patent. And to be clear, the team deserves all the credit. They did the hard work. I contributed the notebooks and some of the ideas, but like most things in life, like, the team deserves all the credit.
Mm-hmm. Pretty cool. And so the last question here is simply, what are 3 things that you're most excited about right now?
I'm very excited about, as I said, like, helping my children launch in their as I go to the next phase of their life. I'm super excited about that, and really in the bowels of like thinking about different schools and all that good stuff. So I'm excited about that. The technology world is prone for hype cycles, right? In fact, Gartner has something called the hype cycle, and it's very well understood. But the hype around generative AI needs to have a better name, by the way. But the hype is real in my mind, and I actually think it's one of the rare exceptions where the hype isn't enough, right? Just if we think about where the world is going and just how far and fast the creation and the connection of dots and the insights that is going to be possible, already is possible, but it's going to accelerate. Like, gosh, these next 2-3 years are super exciting. So I get really excited about that. And then lastly, it's just like, I'm excited to help small businesses, right? Like, it's just, they need our help. There's tools to help them, making the connection to basically allow them to focus on the thing that really, that spark that caused them to create that business in the first place. I get excited about that too. So I had to pick 3. Those would be the 3.
Mm-hmm. Awesome to hear. And so if listeners or anyone wants to connect with you or check out the work that you're up to, where could they find this at?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn a lot. Sometimes I'm on Twitter. My Twitter handle is CR O'Neill, and then LinkedIn, you can just find me.
Okay.
Right there, so.
I will have both of those in the notes. And Chris, thank you again for joining me. I've enjoyed this conversation, and especially learning about the patents and the process about that. So I'm sure when I re-listen to this, and so I can actually focus on what you're saying and not just thinking about questions, I'm going to get even a lot more value out of that. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Julian. It's been a pleasure. You do have that great hospitality. So you're natural at this, and I enjoyed this conversation very much. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. And listeners out there, stay awesome, be limitless, and as always, go be the CEO of your health and life. Goodbye.